Quarter year 13, so my last video for at least for a little while is going over the market for corn. This is something we looked at last week in class, well, online and in class, and we were looking at there's been an increase in supply and how it affects the surplus in the market. So I do just want to remind you that when we looked at that, it was talking about increased funding for Mexican farmers. Now that does sound a bit like a subsidy, but it doesn't actually say it, so we treated it as like, you know, it could have been on research or something to make the inputs cheaper. So it isn't a subsidy. So we were taking the assumption this is not a subsidy. So let's write this here, not a subsidy, because if we did a subsidy, that would look quite different, and the impact on allocated efficiency would be quite different. Okay, it would actually decrease allocated efficiency. So we're just going to take an assumption that it's not a subsidy, just to make it simple really, and then we're going to look at what an increase in supply would do to the surplus in the market and allocated efficiency. So because we have said that it's not a subsidy, we're going to draw my little box here. I love this box that I like. It just makes it so easy to look at changes in the surplus. I don't know, that's not equal, sorry, really bad drawing there. So we're going to look at before supply increased and after, and we're going to look at how that affects the CS, like so, and the PS. All right, in terms of allocative efficiency, when you do this and you look at the before and after, what you're looking is for any surplus area that appears to be lost to the market, or perhaps, yeah, so let's just talk about it that way, where there seems to be an area of surplus that's not being transferred to either party. That's kind of like we're looking for when we talk about allocative efficiency not occurring. You just got to be careful when perhaps the loss of surplus might be because resources are being taken to another market because, for example, demand has decreased or supply has decreased. That's okay, all right? What we're looking for is when the price in particular hasn't been able to freely operate. So the market forces are bidding up and down hasn't occurred. When that hasn't happened and we have some sort of government intervention like a subsidy, it's artificially push the price down, or an indirect tax, artificially push the price up. We're going to look at price controls where it's artificially fixed higher or lower. That's going to have an impact on allocative efficiency where we're going to get a loss. In this case here, because we're assuming this is not a subsidy, supply is just increased, all right, then the price is allowed to be bidded down by consumers to avoid a surplus situation. So therefore, we're saying that it's still allocatively efficient. So it's still allocatively efficient. And that's the whole idea that, sorry, I'm trying to write it quickly. Oh, here we go. Oh dear. Still AE, okay? We're going to see that's because the CS and the PS is maximized. So I'm just going to remind you of this, that allocative efficiency is where the CS and the PS is maximized, not equal. And it's also where supply equals demand, which is what we have here. We have a new equilibrium, P1 and Q1, but we still have a situation where supply equals demand. It's just the new supply equals demand. So let's just put the green. This is the equilibrium before. It's always really good maybe just to do this, just to kind of draw your eye and kind of help you to see the change in surplus if you kind of like focus on the where we were before and where are we after. And this is our new equilibrium here where the new supply curve intersects the demand curve. So let's have a look at filling in my table here. I'll just do a little line. Okay, so with my table here, the consumer surplus before was 1. Okay, hopefully that you can see that. So the area of 1, because that's the top of the demand curve, the amount that they were willing to pay versus what they actually pay, P, okay, times the quantity that they consume. So that's kind of important. Here you have the surplus on each unit that they consume, for example. So the surplus is the idea of the difference between what you're willing to pay and what you actually pay, and then to work out the total of the consumer surplus, we times it by how much they consume. So as a hint, surplus P and Q is important. So in terms of the producer surplus before, here is the price that they received. Okay, then we go to the supply curve, and here is the price that they were willing to accept. So the lowest price that they're willing to accept was down here. And then we go to the old equilibrium and to the price that they actually get. That's their surplus times the amount that they sell. That's the total of the producer surplus. So that was 2 and 4. So what has happened to the surplus after the increase in supply? Well, let's go to our new equilibrium. Now, we can see here quite categorically that the consumer surplus has increased. So it's still 1, so they still have 1. Okay, so this is the demand has not changed. So we still have area 1. So we put 1, and put a little comma. We have area 2. Okay, the difference between the price that they're willing to pay and what they actually pay has increased, so they get more surplus. So they pick up area 2, and they also pick up area 5. Okay, can you see that here? So they're gaining quite a bit in terms of the lower price. They're gaining a lot more surplus on each unit. So 5. And they're also consuming more as well. All right, so they've gained this area of 3 from the increased consumption of corn. All right, so we put a 3 here. So the consumer surplus is now 1, 2, 5, and 3. Okay, so the difference between that they're willing to pay and what they actually pay has increased, and there are more units for them to gain a surplus on because the quantity they consume has increased as well. So we can definitely say without doubt that the consumer surplus has increased. What about producers? They are selling more, but they also received a lower price. So what's going on here? Well, let's look at the new surplus for producers. So here is the new equilibrium. Here's the price that they actually receive. But we read off their supply curve, their new supply curve, to see what is the lowest price that they were willing to accept. So it's around about the same as before, but note the increase in quantity. So the new surplus for producers is here, 4, 6, and 7. The difference between the price they accept, or they receive, and the lowest price they were willing to accept, which hasn't really changed too much. But now, so they keep 4, you can see that, they keep area 4. They gain, however, area 6, that should be a dot, 6, and 7. Okay, and 6 kind of comes about from their, I guess, cost efficiencies. They've been able to save costs and produce more production efficiency gains, if you like. So we have this gain in production efficiency from 5 and 6, where firms and corn growers are able to produce more corn at a lower cost. Okay, so that, or at the same cost, kind of like productivity gains potentially. They've been able to produce more corn at a lower cost, which is why they have this new supply curve. And then 7 is because they're actually selling more units as well. Okay, so they do, in terms of their surplus, it's kind of hard to tell. We really need numbers here, but I don't know. 2 and 4, if you compare that to 4, 6, and 7, it's possibly around about the same, or maybe like a slight increase. Okay, again, I don't want you to worry too much there, being like, you know, has it increased or decreased? You need to look at the model in front of you. It does depend on things like elasticity, price elasticity, that is. It does depend on how much the price has decreased relative to the change in quantity. And you can see that's sort of about the same, isn't it? So for the producer surplus, it's really probably about the same as before in terms of the value of it. If we were to calculate the surplus in terms of the difference between the price they receive and the price they were willing to accept, and how much they consume. The consumer surplus, so we can definitely see that area 1, 2, 5, and 3 is much greater than area 1. And if you think about it, they've got a lower price and they're consuming more, so their surplus has definitely increased. Again, it's not about them both like gaining the same amount. It's the idea that the consumer and producer surplus is maximised, which it is. All right, we gain 5, 3, 6, and 7 to the market through more being consumed and more resources being put into corn. Okay, so I hope that is kind of helping you just a bit. Again, just really focus on, can you see the area of surplus? Can you actually see it on the graph before and after? whether it's increased or decreased, that will come with time, okay? And understanding in depth why it's increased or decreased will again come with time, so don't panic about that. I'm going to leave it for now. Good luck with this, and do try and have a look at price controls. I think you might find it helps you to kind of understand this idea of whether it's allocatively efficient or not. Ka kite.